Okay, Yota, so tell us, how are content creators adopting AI dubbing?
I think this is a very important topic because I've been in the media localization industry for about 30 years, and this is literally the most drastic change I've seen in this time. I've been working on this for the past 4 to 5 years. One of my clients is who was among the first to develop a cascaded AI dubbing pipeline, and then I started looking into this with them. Ended up working with many other AI dubbing companies as well, did proof of concepts, worked on quality metrics for AI dubbing. I've even helped develop courses for AI speech editors, which is the new profile in the market that I want to talk about. And it is the most drastic change that I've seen because it doesn't just complement studio workflows in a way that the speech recognition and machine translation does for subtitling. It replaces them altogether. So I would say AI dubbing is definitely here to stay, but it's still early stage. There was a report by Slater last year when they reported that the 2024 revenue for AI dubbing platform stands at about 360 million, of which 30 is for remote human dubbing. So 30/30 basically. This doesn't include any revenue that LSPs make out of AI dubbing services. But the number is large enough and it gives you an idea about usage and about adoption. I also recently hosted a roundtable on behalf of another AI dubbing company, Dubformer, and there I spoke with Justin Bodin, the CEO of Adapt, and that's one of the leading companies that are offering human-led AI dubbing. And he estimates the actual AI dubbing services market to be at about 10 to 15 million in revenue. So it is a very small market still as compared to the global dubbing market, which is counted in billions, but it is growing fast. And adoption follows this content pyramid that we've seen in many industry presentations so far. You have at the bottom the YouTube and TikTok creators who can't afford traditional dubbing and they use self-service platforms like 11 Labs as an entry point. The middle is the interesting part because there you have broadcasters with unscripted programming, documentaries, fast channels, e-learning companies, sports, basically mostly factual content rather than entertainment, often with a single narrator. Speed matters, and then you have a human in the loop solutions to bring the quality to the level that it needs to be. And I would say these are the most active segments commercially. And the driver for adoption is to expand libraries and catalogs into new languages, new markets, new distribution platforms like AVOD, FAST, and social media, where traditionally dubbing costs basically don't really work. But if you're asking about premium content, the adoption is much, much slower. I've seen so many POCs in the last few years, but not really many rollouts. And a cautionary tale was the Amazon banana fish anime example. There was massive backlash from the fans, and that's also something to think about in the gaming space. So brands really need to be careful with their reputation so as not to lose the trust of their fans. And many people actually believe that AI dubbing, even with the help of humans, just doesn't deliver the quality that's needed for premium content yet.
Yes.
So the responsible approach is to start with the low-hanging fruit, low emotional content without much previous or established dubbing experience to get expertise and then move on to the tougher content. Interestingly, there may be also a cultural dimension when it comes to adoption. There was an interview by Slater again with Ludo Dufour, VP of licensing at CuriosityStream, and he was saying how audiences in Asia are about 80% positive towards AI. So I expect we'll see differences play out when adoption grows, and I expect more pushback from traditional dubbing countries like yours, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, where audiences have very strong expectations of dubbing quality, and they're deeply conditioned by decades of very high quality local dubbing traditions. But that's not the case for English because this conditioning is not there. So in my opinion, there is more room for experimentation if you go into English. Just to close your question, there are basically three blockers. So quality is clearly the obvious one that we talked about for premium content, but also cost is still too high to scale, in my opinion, even with AI, because the human involvement is still considerable and you need to price for that. But both of these, quality and cost, will improve as the technology improves. I like this saying, we have to remind us that AI dubbing that we see today is the worst AI dubbing we will ever see, right? The third one is capacity. There aren't enough trained speech editors in the market, in my opinion. I've heard of content owners wanting to place large orders that even major LSPs couldn't service. And of course, everyone is addressing gradually the capacity issue. It's understandable that all of these new workflows and change management take time, but it's more of an issue of the lack of trained linguists to deal with AI dubbing output. And LSPs are looking for ways to address this. At the GCSE event I was attending last week, AWS was talking about upskilling all their linguists to become AI speech editors. There are also courses. I worked with VoiceSeed on one, specifically designed to introduce linguists to AI speech editing, and you can find it on the UNIDU platform. As a summary, I think we are at early stages, but I believe this market will grow a lot simply because video as a platform will grow a lot, and there will be plenty of jobs for linguists in this direction in the coming years. So I do recommend it as a career direction for people that are looking to expand their skill set. And I think it can be a pretty creative job too. If you are a translator or even better, a subtitler, you can put your language skills, timing, script adaptation skills, and audio skills, if you have them, to practice to direct video in another language. And this can be pretty creative and fulfilling and fun for many translators.
Thank you so much, Yota, for sharing. And you mentioned that one of the main blockers in adoption is quality, right?
Mm-hmm.
My follow-up question to that one is, how are we actually measuring quality right now of AI dubbing, and are there any standard frameworks that people can apply?
Yeah, that is actually one of the most important questions that the industry needs to address right now. And it's something that we're actively working at the GCSE AI dubbing working group that I co-lead. It's the closest that the industry has to a coordinated effort in this respect. We actually plan to publish a white paper with our results, so watch this space. But to answer your question briefly, there is no universal standard yet, and that's why we're working on it. Different frameworks are emerging, though. Just to give you a little bit more context, if you want to evaluate dubbing quality properly, there are five main aspects or dimensions to look at. First, of course, is the voice suitability, what we would call voice casting in a traditional workflow. I think of it as a fourth type of sync, like the voice is in sync with the character. And it's not just about cloning the voice when it comes to AI dubbing or choosing an appropriate voice from a library, but the voice has to be consistent throughout the dub. That's one of the errors that actually comes up sometimes. Then, of course, there's a script translation and adaptation aspect. As translators, we know that natural phrasing, respect for lip sync, isochrony, register, all of these translation issues. The quality of the voice synthesis itself, what we would call performance. If an actor was actually used, is it emotive? Does it have the right tempo, stress? Does it include the right nonverbal sounds as well? That is another topic that, something that makes it feel credible. The synchronicity, is the dialogue well timed and aligns with what we see on the screen, the visual sync, the body movements, the isochrony, the lip sync, and of course, audio engineering, the final mix. And so far, the only published detailed quality metric rubric that addresses all of these aspects is the one by Professor Giselle Spiteri-Migiani. She calls it Script, Speech, and Sound. And it's something that you can find online. I have used it. It's very good. But every company that is in this space for now seem to be using some variation of their own. What we're trying to do at the GCSE working group is to consolidate everything into one industry version to help everyone. So that's still work in progress, but we're getting there. However, the ultimate measure of quality in dubbing, and everyone agrees with this, is audience acceptance. Will the audience tolerate or reject the dub? And of course, this acceptance, if it's there, will it generate extra revenue for the content owners? And unfortunately, there's not a lot of data on this, or even on what the audience like. And we also hear a lot of stories in the press about things that have gone wrong, like the banana fish example. But when something actually works, we don't really hear about it, do we? You only hear about the problems. As a content owner, I suppose if you get no reaction from your audience, that's good news. But it's even better if you have metrics like views on YouTube. A service provider was sharing at our working group that there was a microdrama that the AI dubbed into French, which is actually considered a difficult audience. And that got 150,000 subscriptions and over 10 million views in 1 month. That's success. Also in the e-fitness category, there's been 2 launches in the past year by Apple Fitness Plus and by Peloton, and these are ongoing. So I'm assuming the result there is positive as well. Of course, the content itself will make a difference into how quality is accepted by the audience. At this former roundtable that I moderated, Scott McCarthy was making a distinction between low emotional content. For that, credibility is enough to get you audience acceptance. But when it comes to high emotional narrative, episodic feature film content, you really need authenticity. There's also the issue, and this is an interesting piece of trivia. There's this paper I was reading from 2024, and that talks about how people perceive something that is synthetic versus something that is human. And it has to do with how transparent you are when you are showing the world something that is synthetic. So they did this study in a blind test. People could not distinguish between a human and AI generated output. It was text, but it doesn't matter. And then when the content was attributed to human or AI, the raters consistently rated the human content higher, even when the labels were swapped on purpose to see the results. So I think this might have implications in how content owners could approach transparency. That's an interesting one.
Definitely super interesting insights, Yota. Thank you so much for sharing. And my last question to you is on the blocker side, or at least this is what we've been hearing at the early stages of AI dubbing, that legal implications were also a potential red flag for adoption. So if, let's say, I'm a content creator and I want to start using AI dubbing in my pipelines, what should I know in advance to make sure that I'm legally compliant and cleared?
That is actually a very complicated question and a very good one. My advice to any content owner would be to involve their legal teams even before they start a proof of concept, because it is very important for risk management reasons. Besides being compliant, first you need to be protected. There's the notion of consent, and it's not enough that you as a content owner hold the rights to a specific piece of content. If you're going to alter the original actor's performance, their likeness, their faces, because you want to use visual lip sync, for instance, or if you want to clone their voices, you need to get explicit consent from your talent. So you need to check the agreements that you have with them to see what they say about this synthetic reproduction. But even if you're not going to alter your talent's performance because you're only planning to use a synthetic voice from a library, you would still be sending your talent's biometric data, because voice is biometric data, to an AI dubbing company. So you need to know how they will use this data. Will they use it to train their base model? Will they sell the data at some point? What will they do with it? You would need to think about having clauses in your contract with them that would prohibit them to use these voices for any other purpose apart from producing the AI dub that you need them to produce for you. And then there's a second layer to this. It's about the training data that have been used to train the text-to-speech systems that you would be using to create these AI dubs, and have these systems been trained ethically with recordings that were properly licensed for that purpose. And this is harder actually to keep track of, and we hear all the time about companies that have trained on scrapped content regardless of rights. A lawyer at a meeting that we had was actually talking about that there are currently 50 or 60 class action suits against AI companies for illegal use of data scraped from the internet for training purposes. And then it's a question of being compliant. Of course, you have a legal obligation to disclose AI generated content in Europe and also in many other parts of the world. In Europe, we have have the EU AI Act that requires labeling AI-generated content. And in the US, there's increasing legislation about this as well at state level. In the EU, there was a recommendation about using a universally recognizable symbol for AI-generated content, but this wouldn't tell you exactly where and how AI was used. In practice, what people are doing right now, for instance, in the area of AI dubbing, is to create a slate at the beginning or at the end of a video to say something along the lines, this content has been produced with AI-generated voices. Perhaps in the FAQ pages to explain the process and the human oversight that is involved. Disclosure is much more important when it comes to instructional and functional content because the audience assumes this to be authentic, whereas films are by definition made up. But the law applies across content types. There is also an interesting initiative that is worth following called C2PA, which stands for Coalition and Content Provenance and Authenticity. It is a major industry effort with big companies involved, which focuses on embedding metadata on video content that track it, that trace it from creation. So who made it, how was it made, has it been tampered with? And this is particularly important when it comes to news and other factual content. But when it comes to AI dubbing, this could be a direction that the industry could take with regards to how are we demonstrating transparency at scale, not just with a slate, but with provenance that is actually built into the content itself. So overall, I'd say the legal environment around AI dubbing is still being written as we speak. And this is why it's really important to involve legal counsel early on in the process, to engage with industry bodies and build consent and disclosure processes into your workflow. It's really about protecting yourself, your talent, and ultimately your audience as well.
Thank you so much, Jota, for sharing so many insights with us. We will be sharing in the comments some links to the papers and references that Jota mentioned in this video. But yeah, I hope you learned a lot about AI dubbing, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you so much, Belen. What is exciting is that we are still early on in this process, so we have an opportunity to shape how this technology gets adopted responsibly and at scale with everyone's help.
Let's be part of the conversation. Bye bye.
Bye.